Hello and welcome to the very first episode of CipherMed Weekly. We provide clear insight into regulatory and medical writing to medtech and pharma companies. I am your host, Jang Nguyen, founder of CipherMed. I'm a regulatory consultant and medical writer with over 5 years experience in helping medical device and diagnostic companies get their products to the market, maintain their certificates, and ghostwrite and publish manuscripts. If you're a startup founder, medical writer, clinical lead, or regulatory affairs specialist trying to figure out how to navigate EU MDR without getting buried into documentations, today's episode is for you. We will cover about MDR transition timeline and 3 critical mistakes must avoid. In today's episode, we're diving into MDR transition, and I will share with you 3 big mistakes in preparing MDR submissions and how you can avoid them. For many companies certified under the old MDD, the clock is ticking, especially if your company is small and doesn't have full regulatory teams, or your company focuses on funding engineers and clinical trials and the regulatory tasks get pushed to the end. But MDR isn't just a label change. It demands more clinical evidence, real-world data, and ongoing post-market activity, and detailed justification behind every claim. If you're a Class 2 or even low-risk Class 1, you are not exempt from scrutiny. On March 15, 2023, the European Union extended the transition for the device moving to the EU MDR for Class 3 implantable custom-made devices. The date gonna be May 26, 2026. For Class 3 and implantable Class 2B devices, the date is December 21st, 2027. For non-implantable Class 2B and lower risk devices and Class 1 devices that are higher class under MDR, the date is December 21st, 2028. Next, we'll talk about the big 3 mistakes to avoid. The first one is waiting too long to start clinical documentation. The second one is skipping literature search planning. And the third mistake is thinking PMCF is optional. The very first mistake to avoid is waiting too long to start clinical documentation. Your clinical evaluation report isn't something you can finish in 1 week. It ties together your product risk, literature evidence, equivalence, and safety and performance claims. If you wait until a few weeks before submission, chances are high you either submit a really weak report or worse, you're gonna miss your deadline. Today, I'll focus on the clinical evaluation suite, not the entire MDR submission because it's gonna be too long. But clinical evaluation can cover most of the items in the checklist for MDR submission. I do provide a free MDR submission checklist if you subscribe or sign up on my website, which is cyphermedllc.com. So please do so. Let's start with what is clinical evaluation. You can read detail in the Article 61 in the EU MDR 2017/745. But basically, clinical evaluation confirms the conformity with relevant general safety and performance requirements set out in the Annex 1 under the normal conditions of the intended use of the device. It also evaluates the undesirable side effects and of the acceptability of the benefit-risk ratio referred in the Section 1 and 8 of the Annex 1. Based on the clinical data, clinical evaluation report provides sufficient clinical evidence, including where applicable relevant data as referred in the Annex 3. So why waiting too long to start clinical documentation is a bad idea? I'll talk briefly about the clinical evaluation process. This whole process can typically take up to 6 to 8 weeks if we have all the required information that I will mention soon. But why so long? Let's break down the process. So it would take us about like 1 to 2 weeks to go over the labeling, the design dossier, and the technical documentation to ensure that we have all the MDR requirements, such as the device description, the target population, sterilization process, the cursions, the adverse events, the principle of operations, etc. And especially, all of our documents have to be aligned. So also check the documentation and other related documents for this information. Then identify the similar or benchmark devices and the equivalence devices. We have to be careful here because the definition of these two devices are different. Then we fill out this section for both the CEP and CER, and if our list review plan and report are standalone documents, I would recommend write them up at the same time for these sections. So copy and paste and checking alignment is easier and faster. Then the next step is collecting data. It takes a lot of time here. A side note, for list search timeline, I would talk in detail in our second mistake to avoid, and for the PMCF data, I'll talk in the third mistake to avoid. So I'll skip them for now. But basically, this data collection step can take up to 4 to 5 weeks to finish. The last step is appraising and analyzing data. This step is really critical, because this is how you connect all the data and tell a story about the device and show that your device is safe and effective. So please take time in this step. The hard thing in this step sometimes is because of lacking data. Some of our devices are legacy and has been on the market since forever. So we don't have the preclinical or even clinical data or the PMCF data. And of course, there will be limited list review data. Thus, we have to spend time in this step to justify why our device is to show safe and effective, even though we don't have enough data, and write up a strong justification for any missing data. Overall, the clinical evaluation report has to be able to confirm if we provide sufficient clinical evidence, show conformity with relevant GSPRs, and evaluate the undesirable side effects and the acceptability of the benefit-risk ratio. Thus, this entire clinical evaluation process can take up to 6 to 8 weeks to prepare. And I don't count the review or approval process, which is super long in some company. And if we miss any of the information from the labeling or the risk or any clinical data. So it's really important to start clinical evaluation as early as you can. But also keep this in mind that we do have the 6-month window for our review data, so you have to plan accordingly. The second big mistake that you need to avoid is skipping literature search planning. Most reviewers now expect the literature search protocol before the report, and they want to see your method, how you select the articles, why you exclude some of them, and whether your data is current. If you just dump PubMed result into a Word document, expect rejection. Thus, your literature search protocol and report can't be an afterthought. It sets the tone of your clinical story. But first, let's start with what data come from the list search. The lists include the state-of-the-art, which is SOTA. It includes the background, the guidelines, medical condition, and alternative therapies or treatment related to the device. Then we have the similar or benchmark devices. And if we claim the equivalent device, we will include the list search for the equivalent device. And finally is the device under evaluation, which is due. And depend on how much the list data from the list search, it can take up to 2 to 6 weeks for the whole process. The steps include identify the database, then identify the search terms. After that, we do the list search, and we set the screening criteria, and then we screen all the article for inclusive or exclusive based on these criteria. Then we appraise the included articles. Then we extract the data from the included articles and analyze the data. Then the data from here, we're gonna use it to write the SOTA section. Then we set the performance and safety objective based on the similar and the equivalent device data. After that, we're gonna write the due section data. And then we compare the due data with the similar and the equivalent device data. The list search data fit into the PSUR, the CER, and the PMCFR. Moreover, as I mentioned above, it sets the tone of your clinical story. Thus, it's critical to work on it thoroughly. And the third mistake that we need to avoid is thinking PMCF is optional. It is not. Post-market clinical follow-up is now expected unless you have a very strong justification. Even if your device is low risk, don't assume that you're off the hook. Let's dive in what are requirements of PMCF and whether your device is off the hook. So, is your device off the hook or require the PMCF? Only the Article 6110 devices do not require clinical data as a route to conformity, so they don't require PMCF. However, the definition of these devices is quite vague. The good side is that as long as your device is not a paragraph 4 device, which is an implantable device or a class 3 device. Moreover, devices in the paragraph 6 may also eligible for Article 6110. These devices have been lawfully placed on the market or put into service in accordance with Directive 90/385/EEC or Directive 93/42/EEC, and for which the clinical evaluation is based on sufficient clinical data and is compliance with the relevant product-specific common specific, which is CS, for the clinical evaluation for that kind of device, which such CS is available. They can be sutures, staples, dental fillings, dental braces, etc. You can read more detail in the EU MDR Article 61.6. We will cover PMCF in detail in another talk. So, how can you prepare a clinical evaluation even with a small team or limited time? Let me give you a quick 4-step survival framework. First, start as early as you can. Build your regulatory roadmap now. You align the clinical evaluation, the list search, the technical documentation, SSCP, and PMCF timeline with your R&D, labeling, post-market, and clinical milestone. Then, use templates. Don't reinvent the wheel. Use standard MDR compliant format and update them consistently. Third, gather the clinical data now. Even surveys or small studies can help. Consider PMCF plan that match your resources but still show intent and action. I would recommend prepare all the documents ready, such as the labeling, the IFU and user manuals, study report, both the preclinical and clinical studies, the risk management files early, before writing technical documentation and clinical evaluation reports. Trust me, they can hold up the whole entire process if they're not ready. You can work on the PSUR or the PMSR, the CER, and the technical documentations simultaneously. The information from these documents feed into each other, so you can save time and ensure that they align with each other. Last but not least, tell a clear story. Your reviewers are scientists. Show them you understand your device, your benefit, the risk, the data, and the plan. You don't need 200 pages, but what you submit needs to be complete and consistent and clinical justified. The key takeaway from this episode is that being aware of the MDR transition timeline. Second, start early on data gathering, literature search planning, and clinical documentation. Third, the PMCF justification is critical. Fourth, align all the documents and tell a clear story. I hope this episode helped clarify some of the biggest regulatory traps ahead and how you can avoid them. If you want a free MDR survival checklist, head over to my website, cyphermedllc.com, to sign up. It's short, actionable, and designed just for you. Don't forget to subscribe to CypherMed Weekly on Apple Podcast or Spotify or YouTube so you can never miss an episode. Next week, I'll share about how to structure high-quality clinical evaluation report. Until then, decode the science and deliver with clarity.